At my husband's funeral, my granddaughter kissed me on the cheek and said, "I hope you're next." I smiled, because I knew she was already out of the will. The weight of those words hung in the air as Melissa pulled away, her eyes cold and calculating. At 72, I thought nothing could surprise me anymore, especially after losing George, my partner of 50 years, to a heart attack. But there it was, my own flesh and blood, wishing death upon me at her grandfather's funeral. I kept the smile fixed on my face as she moved away, her designer black dress rustling softly.
Comment where you're watching from. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
I watched as she rejoined her mother, Victoria, who stood nearby, dabbing at dry eyes with a pristine handkerchief. "Mother Eleanor, how are you holding up?" Victoria asked, her voice carrying just enough for nearby mourners to hear her concern. "Always performing, always making sure everyone saw what a devoted daughter-in-law she was." "As well as can be expected, dear," I replied. "If there's anything you need, David and I are here for you. We can stay with you if you don't want to be alone in that big house." That big house. My home of 45 years. The house Victoria had been eyeing since the day she married my son. I knew what staying with me truly meant. It meant getting a foothold. Beginning the process of moving me out and themselves in. "That's very kind, but Sarah is staying with me for the next few weeks." Victoria's smile tightened at the mention of my daughter. Sarah had always seen through Victoria's facade, had warned David against marrying her. It had created a rift between my children that had never healed. Of course, but the offer stands. After all, we're family. Family. The word echoed hollowly as I watched her walk away, her arm sliding around my son's waist. David glanced in my direction, his face revealing genuine grief, unlike his wife and daughter's carefully constructed expressions. My son wasn't a bad person, just blind when it came to the women in his life. I felt a hand on my shoulder and turned to find Sarah, my rock through this nightmare. "Mom, you should sit down for a bit," she said, guiding me toward a chair. "Did I just see Melissa with you?" Sarah asked, her voice low. "What did she say?" "She hopes I'll be joining George soon," I said, my voice steady despite the words. Sarah's face darkened with anger. "That little—" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted. "It really doesn't. How can you say that? Your own granddaughter just wished you dead at Dad's funeral." I squeezed her hand. "Because, dear, your father and I took care of it. Melissa and Victoria won't be getting what they're expecting." Understanding dawned on Sarah's face. "The will? You changed it?" I nodded, thinking back to that day 6 months ago. George had been working at his desk when I heard him call my name, his voice strained in a way I'd never heard before. I found him staring at his computer screen. "Eleanor, you need to see this." On the screen was a social media exchange he'd stumbled upon, a private message thread between Melissa and her friend, left logged in on the laptop she'd used during her last visit. "I can't wait until the old man kicks it," Melissa had written. "Grandma won't last long after that, and Mom says once they're both gone, we'll finally get what we deserve. That house alone is worth over $1 million. There was more. Comments about George's disgusting health problems, jokes about my outdated way of dressing, complaints about visiting us just to stay in the will, the distaste, the impatience, the naked greed, all there in black and white. George's hands trembled as he closed the laptop. "I've been a fool," he'd said quietly. "We both have." The next day we visited our lawyer and rewrote our will. The house, investments, family heirlooms, all would pass to Sarah and selected charities. David would receive a modest sum, enough to show he wasn't cut off, but not enough to satisfy Victoria. And Melissa would receive nothing but George's first edition books, the ones she had always called dusty old junk. "Does David know?" Sarah asked, bringing me back to the present. I shook my head. "Your father couldn't bear to show him those messages. It would have broken his heart. He's going to be blindsided when the will is read." "I know," I sighed, "but that's a problem for another day. Today is for saying goodbye to your father." As we proceeded to the cemetery, I caught Melissa watching me, her expression unreadable. I met her gaze steadily, the ghost of a smile still playing on my lips. Let her wonder what I was smiling about. She would find out soon enough. George had always told me that living well was the best revenge. In this case, living at all, contrary to my granddaughter's wishes, would be revenge enough. The reading of the will next week would simply be the final act of a play that Melissa and Victoria didn't realize they were starring in. I placed my hand on George's casket one last time. "I'll handle this, my love," I whispered, "just like we planned." Then I turned and walked toward the door, my head held high, ready to face whatever came next without the man who had been my constant companion for half a century. The road ahead would be lonely, but at least it would be free from the manipulations of those who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to their inheritance. The house felt emptier than I ever imagined possible. Without George's rumbling laugh or the familiar creak of his recliner, Each room seemed to expand into cavernous space. It had been 3 days since the funeral, and I found myself wandering from room to room, touching his things, his reading glasses on the side table, his cardigan on the dining room chair, his slippers beside the bed. Sarah had gone to get groceries, insisting that I needed to eat something more substantial than tea and toast. The solitude gave me time to reflect on how we had arrived at this point, where my own granddaughter could wish for my death without remorse. It hadn't always been this way. I remembered the day Melissa was born, a pink, squalling bundle with dark hair like her father's. George and I had rushed to the hospital with flowers and a tiny stuffed elephant. Victoria had been propped up in bed, looking remarkably composed for someone who had just given birth, her hair perfectly styled. "Meet your granddaughter," David had said proudly, carefully placing her in my arms. The weight of that tiny human had brought tears to my eyes. Another generation, the continuation of our family. "She's perfect," I'd whispered, and George had wrapped his arm around my shoulders, his own eyes bright as he gazed at our first grandchild. For the first few years, we'd been the doting grandparents, babysitting whenever asked, buying probably too many gifts, and capturing countless photos and videos. Victoria had seemed grateful then, leveraging our eagerness to secure regular date nights with David and weekend getaways. The first real cracks appeared when Melissa was about 5. Victoria and David came to us with a proposal. They wanted to buy a larger house in a more prestigious neighborhood, one with better schools for Melissa and more space for entertaining. They needed help with the down payment. "It's not that we can't afford it," Victoria had explained, perched on the edge of the sofa. "It's just that with David's promotion still a few months away, a little help now would make all the difference." George and I exchanged glances. We weren't wealthy, but we had been careful with our money. George's position as a high school principal and my work as a nurse had provided us with a comfortable life and a decent retirement fund. "How much are you thinking?" George had asked. Victoria named a figure that made me blink in surprise. It wasn't a little help. It was substantial, nearly a quarter of our retirement savings. "That's quite a sum," I'd said carefully. "Have you considered looking at houses in a slightly lower price range?" Victoria's smile had tightened. "The area we're looking at has the best school district in the city. Don't you want the best for Melissa?" It was the first time she had used our love for our granddaughter as leverage, but it wouldn't be the last. In the end, we offered half of what they'd asked for as a gift. Victoria had accepted graciously enough, but something had changed. The weekly visits with Melissa became less frequent. When we called to arrange time with our granddaughter, there were suddenly piano lessons, play dates, or dance classes that couldn't be rescheduled. "She's punishing us," George had said one evening after another canceled visit. "Victoria doesn't like being told no, even partially." I defended her then, making excuses about how busy young families could be. But deep down, I knew he was right. As Melissa grew older, we saw her primarily on holidays and at occasional family dinners. By the time she was 12, there was a noticeable difference in her demeanor toward us. The warm hugs had been replaced by polite but distant greetings. She began to mirror her mother's slightly condescending attitude, commenting on everything from our old-fashioned decor to the basic meals I prepared. The real turning point came when Melissa was 16. Victoria and David arrived for Christmas, with Victoria immediately launching into an account of Melissa's acceptance into an exclusive summer program in Europe. "It's highly selective," Victoria explained, sipping wine. "Only the top students are considered. Of course, it comes with quite a price tag, but it's an investment in her future." I felt George tense beside me. "Actually," Victoria continued, setting down her glass, "we were hoping you might consider covering the program fee as Melissa's Christmas gift. It would mean so much to her future." The amount she named was staggering, more than we had paid for a year of college for either of our children. "That's quite a gift," George said carefully. "We'd need to think about it." Victoria's face hardened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, take your time, though they do need confirmation by the end of January to secure her spot." Later that night, George and I had discussed it privately. We simply couldn't afford such an expense without significantly impacting our retirement security. When we gently declined the following week, offering instead to help with a more modest summer program closer to home, the reaction was immediate. Victoria became coolly polite, and Melissa, taking cues from her mother, began treating us with barely disguised contempt. "I guess Grandma and Grandpa don't think my education is important," we overheard her say to Victoria during their next visit, loud enough to ensure we heard it. The pattern continued through her high school years. Every request for financial assistance came wrapped in emotional manipulation, with Melissa's future happiness always at stake. When we couldn't meet their increasingly extravagant expectations, we were made to feel like failures as grandparents. By the time Melissa entered college, at an expensive private university that Victoria insisted was the only acceptable option, our relationship had deteriorated to holiday-only visits filled with strained conversation and underlying tension. The doorbell's chime pulled me from my memories. I glanced at the clock. Sarah shouldn't be back so soon. When I opened the door, I found Victoria standing there, a casserole dish in her hands and a concerned smile on her face. "I thought you might need some home-cooked food," she said, stepping past me into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "Is Sarah still here? I'm surprised she could take so much time away from work." The implication was clear, that Sarah's presence was temporary, while Victoria's concern was constant and reliable. "Yes, she's just out getting groceries," I replied, following Victoria to the kitchen where she set down the dish. "Well, it's good you're not alone." She glanced around the kitchen, her eyes lingering on various details as if mentally cataloging the space. "David and I have been talking, and we really think you should consider moving in with us. This house is just too much for you to manage on your own now." And there it was, just 3 days after the funeral, and the campaign to get me out of my home had begun. "Thank you for the concern," I said evenly. "But I'm quite capable of managing here. This is my home." Victoria's smile tightened. "Of course, I understand. It's just that we worry about you, all alone in this big house with so many stairs, and the upkeep must be exhausting. George and I have a good support system in place. The lawn service comes weekly, and Mrs. Perez still comes to clean every other Friday." Victoria nodded, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. "Well, the offer stands. We have that lovely guest suite downstairs that would be perfect for you." I smiled, thinking of the reading of the will scheduled for the following week. "Let's not make any hasty decisions. We all need time to adjust to life without George." As Victoria prepared to leave, she paused in the doorway. "Oh, Melissa wanted me to check if you need any help going through George's things. She's particularly interested in those first edition books he was always so proud of." The audacity nearly took my breath away. "Please tell Melissa that I'm not ready to go through George's belongings yet," I said, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "When I am, I'll be sure to let everyone know." As I closed the door behind her, I felt a strange sense of calm. In just a few days, Victoria and Melissa would learn that their years of calculated manipulation had backfired spectacularly. The thought brought me no joy, only a quiet resolve. George had always believed that actions should have consequences. Soon, theirs would. The day of the will reading arrived with a strange sense of inevitability. I dressed carefully, choosing a navy blue dress that George had always said brought out the color of my eyes. As I fastened his mother's pearl necklace, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired but determined. "You ready for this?" Sarah asked, appearing in the doorway. She'd taken 2 weeks off work to stay with me, her quiet support a balm during these difficult days. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied. "Are you sure you're prepared for the fallout? Victoria isn't going to take this well." Sarah's mouth set in a grim line. "Mom, after what Melissa said to you at the funeral, I'm looking forward to it." We arrived at Mr. Harmon's law office 15 minutes early. He had been our family attorney for over 30 years and had handled the amendment to our will with both efficiency and discretion. We had barely settled in when Victoria, David, and Melissa arrived. Victoria swept into the room in a black designer suit that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. Melissa followed, looking bored until she spotted the antique clock on Mr. Harmon's shelf, her eyes calculating its value. David entered last, giving me a gentle hug before taking his seat. "Thank you all for coming," Mr. Harmon began. "We're here today to discuss the last will and testament of George Edward Matthews." I watched Victoria's face as Mr. Harmon read the standard legal preamble. Her expression was composed, but there was an eagerness in her eyes she couldn't quite disguise. Beside her, Melissa scrolled through her phone until Victoria sharply nudged her. "Before I proceed with the specifics," Mr. Harmon continued, "I want to note that Mr. Matthews made significant amendments to his will approximately 6 months ago. Mrs. Matthews was aware of and in agreement with these changes." Victoria's head snapped up. "Amendments? What kind of amendments?" "I'm getting to that. Now, to begin with the distribution of assets." I felt a strange detachment as Mr. Harmon outlined the specifics. First came the charitable donations, substantial gifts to the local library where George had volunteered, the children's hospital where I had worked, and the scholarship fund George had started at his high school. "To my son, David Matthews, I leave the sum of $50,000 and my collection of vintage fishing gear." David nodded solemnly. It was more than enough to be meaningful, but far less than Victoria had clearly been expecting. Her posture stiffened, her hands gripping her purse tightly. "To my granddaughter, Melissa Matthews, I leave my collection of first edition books in the hope that she might someday appreciate their value beyond their monetary worth." Melissa's head jerked up from her phone. "That's it? Just some old books?" "To my daughter, Sarah Matthews, I leave the sum of $200,000, all stocks and bonds held in my name, and ownership of the property, at 1542 Maple Street. Victoria stood abruptly. This can't be right. That's Eleanor and George's house. Please sit down, Mrs. Matthews. I'm not finished. Victoria remained standing. Her face flushed. David is their only son. Melissa is their only grandchild. How can Sarah get everything? Not everything, Mr. Harmon corrected. If you'll let me finish. Victoria sank back into her chair, visibly seething. The remainder of my estate, including all bank accounts, the vacation property in Cape Cod, and all personal effects not specifically mentioned, I leave to my beloved wife, Eleanor Matthews, to use as she sees fit for the remainder of her life. A heavy silence filled the room as Mr. Harmon set down the document. Melissa spoke first, her voice sharp with disbelief. So Sarah gets the house, and we get, what? Some fishing poles and dusty books? Those dusty books are worth quite a bit to the right collector, I said quietly. Your grandfather thought you might finally take an interest in them. This is ridiculous, Victoria snapped, turning to David. Say something. This is clearly not what your father intended. Sarah must have influenced them. David looked stunned. Mom, is this really what Dad wanted? I met my son's eyes steadily. Yes, David. It was a joint decision. But why? He asked, confusion evident. I hesitated, unwilling to show him the screenshots of Melissa's messages that would break his heart. Your father and I had our reasons. Victoria's laugh was bitter. Reasons? Like what? Sarah always was the favorite, wasn't she? Sarah shook her head. This isn't about favorites, Victoria. This is about respect. What is that supposed to mean? Victoria demanded. It means, I said calmly, that George and I made decisions based on the relationships we had with each of you. Relationships are built on actions, not just blood ties. Victoria turned to Mr. Harmon. This can be contested, can't it? There are laws about disinheriting direct descendants. Mrs. Matthews wasn't disinherited, Mr. Harmon replied evenly, and neither was your daughter. They both received bequests. Additionally, the changes were made while Mr. Matthews was of sound mind, with proper legal documentation and witnesses. Victoria stood again, gathering her purse. This isn't over. Come on, David, Melissa, we're leaving. David hesitated, looking at me with confusion. Mom, can we talk about this? Privately? Of course, I said, reaching for his hand. Anytime. Victoria made a sound of disgust before striding toward the door, Melissa trailing behind. At the threshold, Victoria turned back, her eyes cold with fury. You'll be hearing from our lawyer, Eleanor. I hope you realize what you've done to this family. After they left, the room felt suddenly larger, as if the very air had expanded to fill the space their anger had occupied. That went about as expected, Sarah murmured. Mr. Harmon removed his glasses, polishing them. In my experience, money has a way of revealing people's true natures. For what it's worth, I believe Mr. Matthews made the right decision. As we left, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and relief. The bridge with Victoria and Melissa might be permanently burned, but perhaps there was still hope for David. He had seemed confused rather than angry, hurt rather than vengeful. Walking into the bright afternoon sunlight, I took a deep breath. The hardest part was over, but the aftermath was just beginning. Victoria wouldn't give up easily. That much I knew for certain. But for the first time since George's death, I felt a small sense of peace. We had done what was right, even if it wasn't easy. Want to get some lunch? Sarah asked as we reached the car. I nodded, thinking of the long, empty house waiting for me. Yes, that would be nice. Whatever came next, at least I wouldn't face it alone. And as strange as it seemed, I could almost feel George beside me, supporting me in this final act of our partnership. The thought brought the first genuine smile to my face since his passing. The aftermath of the will reading was exactly what I had expected. A flurry of angry phone calls, thinly veiled threats, and a parade of family friends calling to check on me after Victoria spread her version of events. According to Sarah, who still kept in touch with a few of David's friends, Victoria was telling anyone who would listen that I had been manipulated by Sarah into changing the will while in a state of grief. She's making you sound like you have dementia, Sarah said over breakfast one morning, scrolling through her phone with a frown. And she's painting me as some kind of scheming villain. I buttered my toast with deliberate calm. Let her talk. Those who truly know us won't believe her. Sarah set her phone down. What about David? Have you heard from him? I shook my head. In the week since the will reading, my son had been conspicuously silent. I had called him twice, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. I understood his confusion and hurt, but his silence still stung. He'll come around, I said, with more confidence than I felt, once Victoria's initial anger subsides. Sarah looked skeptical but said nothing more on the subject. The doorbell rang just as we were finishing breakfast. Sarah rose to answer it, returning moments later with a strained expression. It's Victoria and Melissa, she said quietly. They want to talk to you. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. Show them in. Victoria swept into the kitchen like she owned it, her designer handbag slung over one arm, her expensive perfume overwhelming the lingering scent of coffee and toast. Melissa trailed behind, looking bored and slightly hungover. "Eleanor," Victoria said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss this situation like adults." I gestured to the empty chairs at the table. "Please, sit down." Victoria took a seat, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. Melissa slouched into the chair beside her, immediately pulling out her phone. "Put that away," Victoria snapped, and Melissa complied with a dramatic sigh. "What would you like to discuss?" I asked, folding my hands in front of me. Victoria leaned forward. "Eleanor, I know you're grieving. We all are. But this decision about the will, it's not like you and George. Someone has clearly influenced you." Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Sarah, who stood leaning against the counter, arms crossed. "Victoria," I said calmly, "George and I made this decision together months ago. It wasn't hasty or ill-considered." "But why?" she pressed. "Why would you cut out your own son and granddaughter? What could possibly justify that?" I hesitated, still unwilling to reveal the full truth. "We made our decision based on what we observed over many years. That's all I'm going to say on the matter." Victoria's carefully composed expression slipped for a moment, revealing raw anger beneath. "Is this about the money we borrowed for Melissa's college? Because we were going to pay that back." "Were you?" I asked quietly. "When?" She flushed. "That's not fair. David's been working hard, but his company went through restructuring. You know that." "This isn't about any one thing. Victoria, it's about patterns of behavior over time." Melissa, who had been examining her manicure with feigned disinterest, suddenly looked up. "Is it because I don't visit enough? Because that's not fair either. I'm busy with school and friends and yet you found time to attend the funeral," I interrupted, meeting her gaze directly. "And to wish me a speedy journey to join your grandfather?" Melissa's face went pale. Victoria glanced between us, confusion momentarily replacing anger. "What are you talking about?" she asked. "Nothing," Melissa said quickly. "Grandma's confused. I would never say anything like that." I smiled thinly. "I'm not confused, Melissa. I remember exactly what you said to me at the funeral." Victoria waved a dismissive hand. "This is ridiculous. We're getting off track. The point is, the will is unfair, and we want to discuss how to make it right." "There's nothing to discuss," Sarah interjected. "The will is legal and binding." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "Of course you'd say that. You got everything." "Not everything," I reminded her. "And Sarah didn't ask for anything. The decisions were ours alone." Victoria stood abruptly. "Fine. If you won't be reasonable, we'll handle this legally. Our attorney thinks we have grounds to contest the will based on undue influence." I remained seated, unfazed by the threat. "You're welcome to try, but you'll only waste your money. The will is solid." Victoria gathered her purse. "We'll see about that. Come on, Melissa." As they moved toward the door, Victoria paused. "David's devastated, you know. His own mother turning against him. The manipulation was so transparent it almost made me laugh. David is welcome to come talk to me anytime," I said, "without you." After they left, Sarah let out a long breath. "Well, that was pleasant." I rose to clear the breakfast dishes, feeling oddly calm. "It went exactly as expected." "Do you think they'll really contest the will?" I shrugged. "They might try, but Mr. Harmon assures me they won't get far. We were very careful with the legal details." 3 days later, David finally called. His voice sounded strained, uncertain. "Mom, can we meet somewhere? Just the two of us?" Relief washed over me. "Of course. How about the cafe by the park, the one with the good cherry pie? We used to go there when he was in high school." Sitting for hours while he talked about his dreams, and I offered what motherly wisdom I could. It had been our special place before Victoria. "That sounds perfect," he said. "Tomorrow at 2? I'll be there." When I hung up, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since the will reading. Perhaps not all was lost with my son. Sarah looked up from her laptop as I entered the living room. "Good news? David wants to meet tomorrow. Just the two of us." She smiled. "That's a good sign. Victoria can't keep him away forever." "I think he's genuinely confused," I said, settling into my chair. "He doesn't understand why his father and I made the decisions we did." "Are you going to tell him everything? About Melissa's messages?" I sighed, the weight of the decision heavy on my shoulders. "I don't know. It would break his heart to know what his daughter really thinks of us, what kind of person she's become." "Sometimes the truth hurts," Sarah said gently, But it's still the truth. I nodded, thinking of the screenshots we had saved, the cruel words that had revealed Melissa's true character. Maybe David needed to see them, to understand that our decision hadn't been about loving him less, but about recognizing the toxic influence his wife and daughter had on his life. I'll decide tomorrow, I said finally, after I talked to him. That night, as I got ready for bed, I found myself talking to George as if he were still there, a habit I hadn't been able to break. What would you do, love? I asked the empty room. Would you show David the truth even if it hurt him? I could almost hear George's response. He had always believed in honest, even when it was difficult, especially when it was difficult. As I climbed into bed, I made my decision. Tomorrow, I would tell David everything, not out of spite or revenge, but because he deserved to know the truth about the people he had chosen over us. It might not change anything, but at least I would have been honest with my son. I fell asleep thinking of cherry pie and conversations from simpler times, hoping that somewhere in the grown man my son had become, there was still a trace of the thoughtful boy I had raised. The cafe looked exactly as I remembered it. Checkered tablecloths, the scent of fresh-baked pies, and the soft murmur of conversations over coffee cups. I arrived 15 minutes early, choosing a booth toward the back where David and I used to sit. The familiar surroundings brought a wave of nostalgia so powerful, it nearly took my breath away. "Mrs. Matthews, it's been ages," said Doris, the owner who had been running this place since David was in high school. "The usual?" I smiled, touched that she remembered. "Yes, please. Coffee and cherry pie. My son's joining me." "David. Wonderful. I'll bring 2 slices." I watched the door, my handbag heavy with the folder containing printouts of Melissa's messages. I still wasn't entirely sure I would show them to David, but I had brought them just in case. My stomach tightened with each passing minute as the clock ticked past 2. By 2:15, I was stirring my coffee absently, the pie untouched before me. At 2:20, the bell above the door chimed, and David rushed in, looking flustered. My heart lifted at the sight of him, so much like his father, with his broad shoulders and serious eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry I'm late," he said, sliding into the booth across from me. "Traffic was terrible." "It's all right," I said, genuinely relieved he had come at all. "I ordered cherry pie. Just like old times," he smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. We sat in uncomfortable silence until Doris brought his coffee and pie, exclaiming over how handsome he'd grown and asking about his work. Once she left, the silence descended again, heavier than before. "Mom!" "David." We spoke simultaneously, then both stopped. "You first," I said. He took a deep breath. "Mom, I don't understand what's happening. Victoria says you and Dad cut us out of the will deliberately to punish us. That Sarah manipulated you both. Is that true?" I shook my head. "No, David. Sarah had nothing to do with our decision, and it wasn't about punishment." "Then what was it about?" His voice cracked slightly. "Because it feels like punishment. It feels like you and Dad didn't care about me, about Melissa." My heart ached at the pain in his eyes. "We cared. We still care very much. That's why this is so difficult." "Then explain it to me," he pleaded. "Because none of this makes sense." I reached for my bag, then hesitated. "David, before I explain, I need to ask you something. Are you happy? Truly happy?" He looked startled by the question. "What do you mean? With your life? With Victoria? With how things have turned out?" He frowned, stirring his untouched coffee. "Of course I'm happy. I have a good job, a beautiful home, a wonderful family. But are you happy?" I pressed. "Because the David I raised wanted to start his own business. He talked about opening a sports equipment shop, about coaching Little League. He laughed easily and spent time with friends." I paused. "When was the last time you did any of those things?" His frown deepened. "People change, Mom. Dreams change. I grew up and got practical. Or Victoria convinced you to get practical," I said gently. David's jaw tightened. "Don't blame Victoria for my choices. She's been nothing but supportive." "Has she? Or has she pushed you in directions that benefited her and her lifestyle?" "That's unfair," he said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I sighed and pulled out the folder. "David, there's something you need to see. Your father discovered this 6 months ago. It's why we changed our will." "What is it?" he asked, eyeing the folder warily. "Messages between Melissa and her friend Alyssa. She left herself logged in on the laptop she used at our house." His face paled. "You read her private messages?" "Mom, that's an invasion of privacy?" "Yes, but your father stumbled upon them by accident. And once he saw what they contained, he felt we needed to know the truth." I slid the folder across the table. "I'll wait outside while you read them. Take your time." Before he could protest, I stood and walked to the front of the cafe, settling on a bench near the window. Through the glass, I watched my son open the folder, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion to something darker as he read. 10 minutes passed. 15. Finally, David emerged from the cafe, the folder clutched in his hand. He sat beside me on the bench, staring straight ahead. "Did you know?" he asked, his voice hollow. About how they talked about you and Dad? About how they were just waiting for you both to die? Not until your father showed me those messages, I said softly. He shook his head, disbelief etched on his face. I don't. Melissa is just a kid. She was venting. She didn't mean. She's 24, David. Not a child. And those messages went on for months. And Victoria? Did she really say those things about getting what they deserve when you both die? I placed my hand over his. According to Melissa, yes. He sat in stunned silence, the weight of the revelation visibly crushing him. I didn't know, he finally whispered. I swear I didn't know they felt this way. I believe you, I said. That's why your father and I didn't confront you. We knew it would break your heart. So instead you changed the will, he said, a hint of bitterness creeping into his tone. We had to protect ourselves. And you, in a way. Victoria and Melissa had shown their true colors. They saw us as nothing more than a means to an end. And what about me? Where do I fit into all this? I turned to face him fully. You're caught in the middle. David, you always have been. We gave you your share because you're our son, and we love you. But we couldn't leave everything to be controlled by Victoria. You know that's what would have happened. He didn't deny it. After a long silence, he handed the folder back to me. I need time to process this, to figure out what to do. Of course, I said, relief washing over me that he wasn't immediately rejecting the evidence. Take all the time you need. I'm angry, he admitted. Not at you and Dad, but at them, at myself for not seeing it. Sometimes we don't see what we don't want to see, I said gently. He stood, hands shoved deep in his pockets. I should go. I need to think. David, I called as he started to walk away. I'm still your mother. That hasn't changed. I'm here whenever you need me. He nodded once, then turned and walked to his car without looking back. I returned to the cafe to pay the bill, finding both slices of pie untouched. Doris raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions, simply boxing them up for later. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions: sadness for David's pain, relief that the truth was finally out, and a tentative hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this revelation might free my son from the manipulative grip Victoria had held on him for so long. Sarah was waiting when I got home, her expression anxious. How did it go? She asked as I set the pie box on the counter. He knows everything now, I said, sinking into a chair. He's hurt and confused, but he didn't reject the truth outright. That's something. Do you think he'll leave her? I shook my head. I don't know. That's not for me to decide. I just want him to see clearly who she really is. That night, I dreamed of George. We were sitting on our favorite bench in the garden, his arm around my shoulders, watching a younger David playing catch with his father's old baseball glove. You did the right thing, Dream George said. The truth always finds its way into the light. I woke with tears on my cheeks, but a lightness in my heart that hadn't been there before. Whatever happened next was in David's hands now. I had done what I could. 2 months passed without a word from David. The official mourning period for George had ended, but my personal grief continued in quiet waves. Some days were easier than others. I kept myself busy, sorting through George's belongings with Sarah's help, donating his clothes to charity, and carefully preserving the items that held special memories. Victoria had made good on her threat to contest the will, but as Mr. Harmon predicted, her case was weak. The judge dismissed it after a brief hearing, citing the clear evidence that George had been of sound mind when making the amendments. I took no pleasure in the victory. It was simply the inevitable conclusion to a sad chapter. On a cool autumn morning, I was tending to George's roses when a familiar car pulled into the driveway. My heart quickened as I watched David step out, looking thinner than when I'd last seen him, with dark circles under his eyes. Mom, he said simply, standing awkwardly at the edge of the garden. David, I replied, setting down my gardening shears. It's good to see you. He glanced around the garden, his eyes lingering on the bench where he used to sit with his father. The roses look beautiful. Dad would be pleased. I'm trying, I said, though I don't have his green thumb. A tense silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken words. Would you like some coffee? I finally asked. He nodded, following me into the kitchen, the heart of the home where our family had shared countless meals and conversations. As I prepared the coffee, David sat at the table, running his fingers over the worn wood grain. Victoria and I are separating, he said suddenly. I paused, measuring my response carefully. I'm sorry. That must be difficult. He gave a humorless laugh, not as difficult as staying would have been. He accepted the mug I offered. After I saw those messages, I started paying attention, really paying attention to how they talked about you, about Dad, even about me when they thought I wasn't listening. I sat across from him, my heart aching for his pain, even as I felt a flicker of hope for his future. The final straw was finding out Victoria had been hiding money, he continued. She's been skimming from our joint accounts for years, Building her own safety net, just in case, she said. I'm truly sorry, David. He shook his head. Don't be. I should have seen it years ago. You and Dad did. He took a sip of coffee, his hands trembling slightly. I moved out 2 weeks ago. Got a small apartment across town. And Melissa? His face hardened. She chose her side. Called me a traitor for not fighting harder for what's rightfully theirs. Her words. I reached across the table, covering his hand with mine. I never wanted this for you. I know, he said softly. But maybe I needed it. A wake-up call. He looked up, meeting my eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for not seeing, for not listening, for choosing them over you and Dad for so many years. You have nothing to apologize for, I insisted. You loved your wife and daughter. There's no shame in that, but there is in letting them treat you both so badly. He squeezed my hand. I miss him. I missed saying goodbye properly because I was so caught up in Victoria's drama. He knew you loved him, I assured him, and he loved you, right until the end. David nodded, tears filling his eyes. After a moment, he asked, what happens now? With the house, with everything? The house goes to Sarah, as per the will. But she's not planning to move in. She has her own place in the city, and all her work is there. So you'll stay here? For now, I said, though it feels too big sometimes, just for me. He hesitated, then said, I've been thinking about what you said at the cafe, about my old dreams. The sports shop? A small smile curved his lips. Yeah, I've still got my business degree and some savings of my own, not Victoria's money, mine. For the first time since he arrived, I felt a genuine surge of hope. It's never too late to start over, David. That's what I'm counting on, he replied, for both of us. We talked for hours, catching up on all we'd missed during those months of estrangement. As afternoon faded into evening, I made a simple dinner, and we ate together, the conversation flowing more easily with each passing hour. Before he left, David paused in the hallway, looking at the family photos that lined the wall. His finger traced the edge of a frame containing a picture of him and George at a baseball game, both smiling widely at the camera. I'd like to come by more often, if that's okay, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Maybe help with the garden. Dad was teaching me about those heritage roses before. I'd like that very much, I replied. After David left, I called Sarah to share the news. Her joy was immediate and genuine. That's wonderful, Mom. I knew he'd come around eventually. We still have a long way to go, I cautioned. But it's a start, the best kind of start, she said. A honest one. The following weekend, David returned as promised. He arrived in old jeans and a flannel shirt, ready to tackle the gardening tasks that had overwhelmed me. We worked side by side, pruning the roses and preparing the garden for winter. I've been looking at commercial spaces, he mentioned casually as we took a break on the bench. For the shop. Really? Where? Downtown, near the high school. There's an old storefront that's been vacant for a while. Good location, reasonable rent. My heart swelled with pride. Your father would be so pleased to see you following your dream. I think he gave me the courage to do it, David said. Even after he was gone, finding those messages, changing the will, it forced me to look at my life and realize I wasn't living it for myself. As autumn gave way to winter, our new routine solidified. David came by twice a week, sometimes to help around the house, sometimes just to talk or share a meal. On Sundays, Sarah would join us, and the three of us would reminisce about George, sharing stories and memories that kept him alive in our hearts. At Christmas, we gathered in the living room around the tree that David and Sarah had insisted on setting up. The house felt warm and full again, if different from before. I have news, David announced after dinner. I signed the lease. The shop opens in February. Sarah raised her glass. To new beginnings. To Dad, David added, for showing us what really matters. To family, I said. The real kind. Later that night, after they had gone, I stood by the window, watching the snow fall gently on George's garden. I could almost feel him beside me, his presence comforting in the quiet house. We did all right, I whispered to him. It didn't turn out how we expected, but maybe it turned out how it needed to. The wound of his absence would never fully heal, nor would the pain of Melissa's betrayal. But something new had grown in their place, a stronger bond with my son, a deeper appreciation for my daughter, and a clearer understanding of what family truly meant. It wasn't about inheritance or obligation. It was about respect, about valuing each other enough to be honest, even when the truth hurt. It was about choosing to stay connected, not because of duty, but because of love. As I turned from the window, I smiled. The path ahead would not be easy, but for the first time since George's passing, I was ready to walk it, one step at a time, with my true family beside me.